if I tell anybody like strategic foresight, they just blank out. But when I say, let's say, design fiction, yeah, like they're like, yeah. But when I go design fiction, they're like, okay, what is that? Like, tell me about that. And then I explain them, oh, it's all about coming up with these future artifacts. You can tell a story about an object from the future, and then people are hooked, and then they want to listen about it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. You've tuned into Talk About Your Community. This is a special pre-recorded episode of TAYC, and really glad you're here today. On this show, we meet people who have all sorts of perspectives on building better communities, whether they're online, offline, or my favorite, those that take advantage of both. And today is a day that I'm very excited about because I get to have a friend and colleague on who I've known for a good while now, Deepshikha Yadav, who is a futures facilitator and the founder of World We Desire, a strategic forecasting collective. And we have been talking about getting together to do maybe a workshop, maybe a call on exploration on the topic of the future of communities and community management and ways to start applying some of the tools and mechanisms and frameworks of future foresight thinking to our specific profession of those of us who are crazy enough to try to build communities in online and offline spaces. So, Deepshikha, I hope I haven't misrepresented you in any way. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you so much, Todd. And yes, it's been years since we've known each other. And like it was just so special from the start. Like I felt such connection, and that's why I followed you. And then, yeah, I love connecting every single time I connect with you. So thank you for having me here. Yeah.
Well, it's fun to have these kinds of conversations. I've often expressed my interest in future foresight work. It's something that I followed for quite some time. I try to read people's work in the space, but I am at best an interested amateur at this work. And so, talking to somebody who is a practitioner within the future foresight space is wonderful and insightful. I always come away inspired, from these kinds of conversations, and particularly with conversations with you. I'm wondering, how did you end up in the profession of foresight?
Oh, yeah, okay. So the origin story of this lies way back when I was in my engineering college, and I read these books by this futurist called Alvin Toffler. His 3 books, Third Wave, Future Shock, Power Shift. It like just completely influenced me a lot. But at that time, I wasn't aware of this profession. And I just read it because it was like a recommended read for GMAT and everything. So, but I was hooked from then. And then much later, when I was doing workshops for my community. So in India, most of the entrepreneurs you come across are tech entrepreneurs. So, and especially in Bangalore, which is like the tech capital of India. So a lot of folks who were attending my workshops were techies, and I wanted them to start thinking about the impact of technology. And that's when the speculative design within futures thinking, those workshops started happening, because I wanted them to start anticipating how could their actions impact the future. And that's how it started. But I think it took up a notch during COVID because I was seeing so many people going through so many things, and I realized the same tools, if applied to their personal life, could really create a shift. So there's a field within futures foresight and futures thinking called personal futures, where you apply these same tools which were designed for these organizations to make sense of uncertainty in your own personal life. And when I started doing these workshops, I could see like tremendous shift right away, especially in that pandemic time. And that's where I think World We Desire actually took off around that time. So yeah.
Very neat. And I love the optimism of World We Desire as just a name for organization. So what I found from my interactions with people that do future foresight work is there's an entire lexicon. There are different frameworks or methodologies or approaches to doing this stuff, and it could seem a little off-putting. And I'm wondering, how sort of you've navigated that space, and you know,
Yeah.
what is your take on future foresight? Is it scenario planning? Is that like sort of utopian
Yeah.
future, dystopian future, probable futures? Is that sort of a mindset approach that you take, or have you got different frameworks that you like to apply?
Yeah, first, yes, you're right. Like the frameworks are so vast, and then the frameworks range also, right? So there are the speculative frameworks, which are less constrained and more imagination based, and then the strategic foresight frameworks, which are more quantitative and more data driven, right? And then, so within speculative design, then there's the design fiction, which is intriguing, and then there's personal futures, like, so there's a range of things within futures thinking that you can apply, and that's what I do. Like, so my mission is to make foresight available to people from different backgrounds. So I've done my foresight workshops for digital nomads, for designers, for creatives, for lawyers. So I really want these tools to be introduced to this different segment of society who may not be at the moment getting access to these tools. So for them, I try to find a way to Trojan horse them, because if I just tell them, if I tell anybody like strategic foresight, they just blank out. But when
They're
I
like,
say, let's say
this is
design
great.
fiction, yeah, yeah, like they're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But when I go design fiction, they're like, okay, what is that? Like, tell me about that. And then I explain them, oh, it's all about coming up with these future artifacts. You can tell a story about an object from the future, and then people are hooked, and then they want to listen about it. So my approach is mostly to like just meet them where they are. So if I have to talk to the designers, then I would talk about design fiction. If I had to talk about to entrepreneurs, then it's more on the like the speculative designer on the future of their industry and the future of their sector, using very playful methods. So yes, what I initially, when I approach any of my audience, I try to keep the foresight part at the background, and just let the objective of the workshop be the main thing, and then slowly introduce during the workshop. You use these frameworks as a backdrop, and then I've always found that once they get introduced to the frameworks, they are hooked. They really want to then explore and read more about it and start applying in other areas of their life. So yeah.
I wonder. So I love the fact that you're tailoring your approach to the audience and sort of what their predispositions happen to be. I think that's really smart. I'm wondering, like, when you're working with some of those individuals who've not really ever met a future
Yeah.
foresight person, and I've
Yeah.
been using future foresight very specifically as a term, but like, what are your feelings about futurist or
Exactly. Oh,
prognosticator, like they're
yeah.
yeah, I wonder the extent to which they bring like some assumptions about, like, is this somebody that's predicting the future for me, to like,
Yeah.
you have to deal with those kinds of those sorts of attitudes when you're working with those audiences.
All the time. And I get like a range of emotions, like the funny ones. Like, I remember one time telling, oh, I'm a futurist to somebody, and they laughed, and they said, ha ha ha, me too. Yeah, it's like it feels like a very like, oh, just a crystal ball kind of a profession kind of thing. People don't understand it's very strategic. And then there are other times when I would say that, and then the immediate question would be, oh, so what do you think? Is AI going to take away our jobs, or like predict this future, or what type of future this is going to look like, right? And again, futurist, the job of a futurist is not to predict a future. One of the main sayings within futures thinking is like, there's no one future, there are just multiple different possibilities. And nobody knows the future because it hasn't happened yet. So it is about exploring these other possibilities and what do we need to do about it right now. And yes, there is not enough awareness about the profession out there. So yeah, so I normally go as a futures facilitator, and then slowly introduce myself as, oh, it's very similar to design thinking, but then we are thinking about 10 to 20 years from now kind of future. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. You, yeah. So like the community profession, it sounds like you spend a
Yep.
lot of time evangelizing and
Yeah.
educating about what
Yes.
the role is and what it actually does.
Yeah.
Um, that does make it somewhat more complex to do that work and to do
Yeah.
business development or around that as well, I would imagine. Um, so one of the best ways that I've that, or at least what struck me as a good way of thinking about this, is it's not so much about prognosticating or predicting the future,
Yes.
and I think
Yeah.
it's more about um, casting yourself into future situations and thinking far
Yeah.
enough ahead is a way to imagine better futures and to try to think about, like, how would I act, when, if and when this set of circumstances happen, and base
Right.
sort of those future scenarios upon uh like I've heard the term signals of the future, like things that
Yes.
are happening
Yeah.
now, that what if
Yeah.
these became more ubiquitous or
Yes.
well distributed, like how would I interact in those situations?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it is exactly about the sense making, about how, like, extrapolating these signals and then coming up with a very intelligent way. Like, it's not about envisioning out of the blue. It is about making intelligent sense of how the future might look like. And yes, that is the objective. You were very right in saying that, is like to ensure that people are steeped into these kind of futures, so that when these new signals of change start arriving, they can make sense of, okay, this is where things are headed. So there's this one term by this futurist that I earlier mentioned, Alvin Toffler. It's called future shock. So he
Mhm.
talks about, like, with the convergence of society, with the convergence of emerging technology, the rate of change is going to be so much faster than the rate at which we can adapt. So most of the folks are going to be in this state of overwhelm, and that is the state of being in a future shock. And so I think for a lot of futurists, what drives them is this feeling to ensure that people are prepared for the future that's coming, so that they can like make the most of the opportunities, and also avoid the risk and not create the futures we don't want to live in as well. Yeah.
A practical example of that being borne out is, I think, was it is her name Jane McGonigal, wrote
Yeah. Yeah.
Imaginable.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yes.
love that
I
book. It's been a while since I read
Yes.
it, but
Yes.
I mean, she sort of had a claim to fame that she was sort of presupposing the idea of a global pandemic
Yes.
before
Yes.
COVID ever happened.
Yeah.
The people that
Yeah.
went through those exercises were put in a spot where they were more prepared to
Yes.
deal with the overwhelm of
Yes.
that situation happening, because they had imagined how they might react in those situations.
Yes.
So they were a little more mentally resilient
Yeah.
when that actually happened to happen.
Yes, they had done this. From what I've heard, they had done this simulation for, I think, for a financial institute, and so they were so prepared by the time it came, and it happened, I think, like 7, 8 years, I think 10 years before the
Yeah,
pandemic.
yeah, it
So
was a long time
they were very
before.
prepared. I know. So yeah, you need to have that foresight and that level of investment, and trust that, okay, it may pay off at some point, or
Yeah.
when it pays off in big ways, right? Yeah.
And I've heard too, and so for those of you that have been sticking with us, through the early part of this conversation, I think this is sort of a grounding conversation. I do want to switch gears to talk a little bit about the community profession and sort of where we've been and where we are, and maybe some signals that
Mhm.
I think might be worth brainstorming about a little bit here, because
Yeah.
I know we're not doing a
Yeah.
formal approach, but I
Right.
wanted to provide everybody with a little bit of grounding about future foresight with this. So thanks for playing along with me with this, Deepshikha.
No problem.
Um,
Yeah.
the one of the things that I've heard, like, from McGonigal, because she's one of the future
Yeah.
foresight people that I've probably read the most. I do pay
Yeah.
attention to Institute for the Future and some other of those
Yeah.
think tanks, but
Yeah.
she was saying that, like, uh, you need to be looking maybe 10 years into the future, because maybe we have a tendency to look too much at near-term futures and
Yes.
not put ourselves into an unfamiliar enough situation that we've got to think about how we would feel and act and um, sort of react to things in a more unfamiliar kind of situation. What are your feelings about that approach?
Yeah, I agree. And like when people think like, oh, 10 years, it might be very difficult to kind of extrapolate that much amount of time. But what I find is like this future thinking field is filled with such amazing small exercises as well, even if we are not applying the framework. Just from IFTF only, or by Jane only, or like at least she has been promoting this method. There's this method called first 5 minutes in the future. And what
Yeah.
they do is like it's just a game, right? You're aware of that?
I remember, yeah. So I was briefly, like, I think for a few months I was part of her online community and sort of,
Yeah.
that got some of her stuff. It was quite interesting. Yeah.
It is interesting, right? I recently played it with a technology company back in Nepal, and it was so fun to like just put it as a interactive activity the board outside their office, and then just see what the responses come for the different scenarios you throw at them. So yeah, really. So there are just so many ways to just think about the long term future, and it's not as difficult as people imagine. But of course then there are the proper techniques through which you can kind of extrapolate it. But yeah, so the other thing about futures think the another saying within futures thinking is like any useful statement about the future must at first sound ridiculous. So that's a great test. If you are making a statement, if it's not sounding ridiculous enough, most likely you're talking about midterm future, not a very long term. So that's like a litmus test. If it sounds icky, if it sounds like I don't want to live in this future, even if it's like a positive future you're talking about, if it's not sounding too unfamiliar, like then you haven't really gone there. And actually that's one thing that ends up happening so often in my workshops. Like people will go get into all these playful mode and they'll go bonkers with, oh, this will happen, these will be the headlines of the future, this is how, let's say, the designer babies futures are going to look like, and they're having a lot of fun. And then I tell them, okay, now put a timeline to it. And then they start putting the years to it, and then they realize it may happen in our lifetime, and they are like, I do not want to live in this future. So right. So yeah, this realization of hitting that these really weird sounding things could actually happen in our future itself, we may have to face it, it always hits. Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you were describing that, it reminded me. I've been on this tear. I have a huge man crush on Jeremy Utley, who is um, he's an innovations guy, like design thinking and innovation. He works for Stanford's D School and has
Mhm.
written a book called I think it's called Ideascape.
Okay.
Um, I've been terrible with remembering titles today. Anyways, I've been following him because since the rise of AI tools,
Yeah.
he has been a huge proponent of using that as a thought partner
Yeah.
for innovation. And one of his key points in his book, in which he brings into the work that he's been doing to evangelize the usage of AI, the intelligent usage of AI, I should mention,
Hmm.
um, is it's about generating breadth of ideas.
Hmm.
It's not about generating good ideas. It's about
Yeah.
generating ideas. And in fact, maybe a good way to get people's creative juices flowing is to say, what are the worst ideas that you can think of to address this problem,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I have
Exactly.
this sense that foresight work is maybe playing with the same
Yeah.
thing. Like
Yeah.
you need to sort of cast far enough ahead that it does seem like a ridiculous statement, that it does seem like
Yeah.
things that maybe would seem bad, on the face of things,
Yeah.
but maybe there's some good ideas in there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. there's a term within, especially within design fiction, which is prototypes. It's like provoking prototypes. So the
Mhm.
intent is to make something so provoking, like it could be like extremely shocking or just disgusting, but really make the audience who's interacting with that future artifact to really have that reaction, so that it starts a conversation. And that
Yeah.
is the intent, right? We are not saying this is the thing that will happen in the future, but we are saying if this future happens, what are the implications of it? Yeah.
Yeah. And again, just to sort of wrap this up, like the purpose of all of these uh, imaginations, these future design fictions and scenario plans, that we put together is to help us be more prepared for the futures that come. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I would say two, three things, right? One is like in a way, kind of future proofing your business, your country, whatever, right? Because in some ways, it's about anticipating what are the possible disruptions, what can go wrong, what are the wild cards, what may happen, and how could you prepare for it now, much like how IFTF did with that COVID simulation, right?
Yeah.
So, really helping governments, especially, be prepared about like, for example, at the moment, all these protests are going on in Nepal. And the first thing that went was the social media and everything, right?
Mhm.
These are unknown knowns. Like we know these kind of things could happen. So how could we prepare for it in advance? Like how could we have strategies for these kind of things? Like how could we foolproof our strategies, that the strategies still go on even if these kind of interruptions happen? So one is it's about anticipating. The other is it's also about responsible design in some ways, like really giving enough forethought to the innovations of tomorrow, that you are looking at what are the ways it could go wrong, or what are the unintended consequences, or how could a bad player use it. And you are not just thinking about the features, but you're thinking about the future that this invention will create, so that that thought goes into it. These are some of the ways, and there are many more, which futures thinking stand for. Like it's also just a tool to have a great conversation with the stakeholders. Like instead of giving them these graphs and reports, long reports and stuff, you can give them these artifacts or these narratives about the future, and just make them see the implication of this decision versus the implication of this decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say at this moment in 2025, um, is this a good time to be a future foresight professional? Like are people even open to to casting their imaginations that far ahead? Because I feel like there's so much short-term reactive thinking at the moment,
Yes. Yes.
and I worry that the message of future foresight might be seen as, oh, that's too abstract. It's in the future. Are people are people amenable to the message of foresight at the moment? Are you? And that's a terrible thing for me to ask you, but I'm sorry.
No, no, it's such a relevant one. So two ways, right? One is, of course, when we look from the client perspective, it is a bit difficult to convince them. And even if you do the projects and it has all these futuristic conversation going on, it is still very difficult for them to relate, like how it is going to make sense for me today, even though futures thinking kind
Yeah,
of covers that, right? But yeah, to make
yeah,
them see the ROI on investing on something which may pay off, or which may not pay off in the long term, that is slightly difficult. But I'm also amazed sometimes to see the organizations which we approached, and they already knew about foresight and they wanted to get into foresight. So there
mhm,
are these there is some change. It's still in like more on the emerging field, and a lot of futurists mostly use the word strategy instead of foresight. um, there
sure.
are just different ways of communicating, but from the futurist perspective, in the those who are in the field, the professionals, I think one is the community of futurists is there are different communities, but they are very receptive um, to all different types of people. And if when I see my colleagues, so many of them have come from such different backgrounds, like irrespective of the background or what your career was so far, if you have interest in the field, you can get into it if from and you bring in that another perspective because of your field. So yeah.
Wonderful. So, well, let's crack our knuckles and talk a little bit about the community
Yes.
profession right now. And um, this is something that we had not pre-rehearsed or discussed or anything. So
Yeah.
this is kind of a riff, I think, for both of us. But and of course, caveats around this. This is my perspective about
Mhm.
the community profession, the community practice, from the little hill that I stand on, and that means my
You
perspective from
are you are the expert on communities. Who else? Yeah.
I'm one of many, and I'm uncomfortable with the label of expert, but I am very familiar with the space, and I've had the privilege to be able to practice in that space for a number of years now. I just celebrated my 10th year in business
Oh
as an independent.
yay.
So I feel like I've kind of passed some milestones, and I've had a chance to work with dozens of organizations over the years that have been building or built, online communities, and had a chance to advise them, in that work. Um, in terms of perspective, I would say that the the role or the practice area of being a community manager is
Mm.
something that emerged in corporate and nonprofit spaces in the early 2000s. Prior to that, going back to the beginnings of the internet, online communities are something that have always been with us, from Usenet groups, email listservs, uh, AOL chat rooms,
Yes.
and discussion forums. We have, there's a long provenance and history of people using digital virtual spaces to get together and collaborate with each other. In terms of it actually being a paid profession, a lot of those early uses were just enthusiasts or people who were
Yeah.
fans of a particular movie or author, or they wanted to come together because of a shared interest, support groups, around things. But now I think since maybe the mid early 2000s to today, we've seen the evolution of a career practice around this
Right.
work. And so you'll have someone who identifies as a community manager. There's not a 4-year degree program for it. There's not a 2-year degree program for it.
Yeah.
There's some training that's out there, but there's nothing that's a gold standard like you would find in like PMI for project management.
Yeah.
There's not a credential granting institution that is recognized across the profession as anything, being something that I should definitely have on my resume, if I'm a community manager. So it's a very open profession, and most people end up in that profession 100% by accident. Didn't know that
Mm.
it existed.
Yeah.
Um, Through the 2010s, the role kind of grew up. We started to see, some organizations that formed around best practices like Community Roundtable, that started
Mm.
publishing research, CMX that really kind of became a gathering space for community professionals, and then into the late 2010s and the early 2020s, we've had coming out of the pandemic that groups like Led by Community, and then a variety
Yeah.
of other more niched experience areas have sort of blossomed out,
Mm.
including one that I'm very involved with, the Community Consultants Collective, which is very
Right.
specific niche for community professionals who serve a variety of communities instead of just working for one company in that
Yeah.
work. So it feels like we've gone through some maturity, within the profession. The pandemic and the rise of cryptocurrency had profound effects upon the community profession, because at that time people were much more interested in enabling digital connection and spaces whenever we were all in isolation as a
Right.
result of things. And with the rise of cryptocurrency, there was suddenly a lot of excitement about setting up discords, and they wanted to hire a lot of community managers to manage those discord spaces for people that were trading, and they were creating communities around that, although I might well argue that those weren't truly communities but more transactional networks that were created. But that's me parsing. What happened was that it ended up bringing a lot of new people into the space in the early 2020 timeframe, around the time of COVID. We got past COVID, and a lot of organizations didn't know what they were doing, and they said, "Well, we bought this expensive platform." A lot of the enterprise organizations that would buy some of the bigger enterprise community platforms said, "Oh, that didn't work out for us," and they just abandoned it. And so a lot of community professionals was out of a job, or pulling back a program. So there was a big downsizing that's happened over the past couple of years, to the point where we are today, where CMX just put out their 2025 report and said it seems like the downsizings, the bloodlettings have kind of leveled off. There's not a lot of new hiring, but programs seem to be solidly in place. Like people have really had an opportunity to bear down. They're a lot more capable of communicating and feel more confident that they're communicating the return on investment for these online community spaces. But of course, now there's a lot of uncertainty about how AI fits into this picture and disrupts things. And I think we're sort of at the start of this new wave of thinking about how things may change in the near-term future, because of technologies that are able to some extent, and I would say still pretty unsuccessfully, interact with humans to help them with things. So my long-winded narrative, but I wanted to give you sort of context about sort of how I'm seeing the space at the moment.
Yes.
So where do we start with this conversation? How do we start thinking about the future of what may be in store for community management?
And so more as a facilitator, my answer would be more around the approach. If I had to approach this question as a exercise, so there's this one activity that I love to do. It's called Trends Radar. And so we look at the whole evolution of these different tools. What are the established tools already about community, and then what's hot right now? What would be the next best thing? And then similarly, but that's just a conversation around the tools. But there's also like, why were community managers needed earlier, and why are they needed now? And there's this like, in which scenario are they? Like maybe now it's more about the psychological safety or crisis management and those kind of things when they are mostly called upon. And then there are also the pain points, like how are the pain points evolving as well? Like what used to be their pain points and now what is it? Like when we kind of take a whole gamut of this in kind of a snapshot in time, past, present, future, that gives a big idea on what was dominant earlier and what now is emerging. Like if we have to look at it in an abstract form, so maybe some of the things that may come up is like, maybe yes, community management, so far it was more like led by somebody, or like somebody was governing it, and now maybe it's moving more towards more of these decentralized governance, and everybody would have a say on it, things like that. And again, earlier it was also again more merit and skills based, but now, especially if DAO and everything comes in, like whoever has more tokens and more membership shares, that wins. So maybe those who have more money will have more say, they will have more votes. But yeah, it's moving towards more participatory decision making kind of environment, to being more one to many kind of thing. So again, that would be very interesting to see, like how we end up making these decisions collaboratively.
So that's you said a lot of interesting things here that I want to respond to. So for DAO, you're referring to decentralized autonomous organizations. That's something that's governed by the blockchain as a way to make more equitable member run sorts of organizations. Love the concept. Have not seen it in effect in the wild. I did have a guest on some time ago who talked about DAOs and sort of was introducing the idea, and had pointed to a few examples in the wild. I don't think they're currently easy to implement,
Right.
and I don't think they're not well distributed. There's not a community platform company that says, "Hey, we specialize in DAOs." Like, to my knowledge, there's nobody that's doing that. So I would almost view that as a future signal, as like, we have the capability of doing this, we just don't do it right now.
It's a weak signal of change. It's yet to be seen how it will play out, but we can't rule it out yet. It may play out big way, but yeah, we have to pay attention to that. So like not exactly DAO, but at least on the idea of collective decision making, where the different community members get to make the decision together. There are collectives, freelancer collectives, and that are popping up, which use that method. Probably they have not integrated the DAO part yet, but at least this idea of decentralized kind of decision making, that is coming up more and more in the collectives.
So it's interesting to me because I think it provokes a question about the future of the profession, which is there a future where we don't need community managers anymore? And that's a little bit of a scary prospect for people that have pinned a career on this, like myself, and I'm more of a strategist than a practical community manager, but obviously that would have an impact on my profession and what I do. And if things moved in the direction where communities were entirely self-governed by the members, do you need a community manager, in a role in that space? Does it become more of a community administrator, or like, maybe there's a shift into a world where, I think of it in terms of, like, in the United States, there are cities that have a elected mayor versus a city manager. City manager is a hired role, and their job is to execute on policy. Like, the group decides what needs to happen, and it's the city manager's role to maybe advise, but to really kind of enact things, to make them work. The mayor's role, however, they're elected and they're setting the vision, and they're telling others what, where they want things to go, and setting a direction. I kind of almost think about it in that difference, like the character of being a community manager could maybe change as a result of that. I'm maybe going to shift a little bit too, that where I think about, a world without community managers, is there one where AI has gotten good enough? I'm not going to say necessarily AGI, maybe, that's the case, but the AI has gotten good enough that it manages the community. And maybe there's a human in the loop, but it's a part-time role at best. And maybe you have community managers then in the future that are really kind of human in the loop for multiple communities that they're running. They're not necessarily working for one company. They're more sort of in a fractional role, for some of that. I can imagine some other ways that could play out.
Yeah, probably. But I also feel like maybe like the AI would more be like a co-pilot with the community manager, both the human and the AI working together.
That's the story we're telling ourselves right now.
Right? That is the current future.
There's a lot of community professional conversations around AI, as you might imagine, just as there are in many industries. And the early narrative concern was, oh, is AI coming to take my job? And then pretty quickly after, I would say within the first 6 months of LLMs kind of, hitting the public consciousness, the consensus narrative was, no, it's not going to take our jobs, but it's going to be a co-pilot. It's going to work with. And I think that's sort of been the promise, and it's been a protected narrative for a long time.
Yeah.
But virtual, AI agents are a real thing now. And is it outside of the bounds of imagination for us to say that, a company or startup that doesn't have the money or desire to hire a community manager to do the work wouldn't try to deploy an AI agent as a community manager instead of a live human?
Yeah, there are two things I want to say to that. Like, one
Yeah.
is we are also assuming that the cost of these AI operations is going to remain the same. I think at the moment it's kind of like subsidized, but once we start replacing humans with AIs, I think this, I don't know how many companies are going to be able to afford this. Or just the cost of operations is definitely going to go high, and we'll have to evolve with that. And the second thing is that is also the main reason that I designed this workshop on future of expertise, is to have this conversation on, okay, what will my future identity as a community manager, professional identity is going to look like in this kind of world where this kind of communities exist. What are the skill sets I might be required to have? And like, will my future work identity going to survive the future tech? So that's what I do in these workshops, like throw a lot of different scenarios, tech-based scenarios. Maybe it is AI-based scenario, maybe it's AR, maybe some other technology, maybe even it's this neuro technology. How the scenarios being impacted by these technologies? How can you see whether your identity will thrive in this scenario, or will it collapse, or do you need to adapt? So these give some thoughts to individuals in terms of, okay, maybe this, if I integrate these qualities within my skill set now, not a couple of years from now, but if I start integrating these, what might happen? Like, maybe I will have a competitive advantage, right? So I feel like probably we won't have one community manager, but all these individuals who are acting or who are part of the community, each will have to have a different type of skill set so that they are included in the community, right? They need to have some merit to be part of that community, and they need to bring certain skill sets. And that's why I feel like the imagination part probably might play a big storytelling, imagination, the very, very human skills might be so much more valued in these AI world, because that's so inherently what we bring.
These are deep waters, Deepshikha. Thank you. I love it. So I don't normally do this in my show, but I would like to close with a bit of a challenge or a question, or not to you, but to our listeners. If this sort of thinking is of interest to you around your profession, particularly, I'm talking to you, community managers out there, my colleagues, my friends. If this were something that you think would be valuable to participate in a facilitated workshop with Deepshikha and myself, please drop some comments down below, and we'll put together an application form to be a part of this little think tank, and maybe we can build a session. Obviously, we'd have to compensate Deepshikha for her time to do this, but I think it would be really interesting, because so much of the community industry, community profession, if you will, is focused on short-term thinking, maybe just the immediate year ahead. Like, what is my next fiscal year? What am I getting budget, from the executive leadership team? Maybe if we could think a little further ahead, as Deepshikha said, we can have a competitive advantage and be better off at doing that. So So let me know, please do. And then, Deepshikha, this has been wonderful. I know we've just scratched the surface in the minuscule way in the hour that we've had, but any closing thoughts that you have, or words of wisdom for anyone that wants to maybe learn a little bit more about future foresight work?
Yeah, I would just say I don't think foresight is kind of a luxury anymore, especially in this world where the technologies are evolving so fast. I think we each need these tools to be able to make sense of this uncertain world. And we need these to also be able to then lead the communities that we are leading by having access to this tool and preparing our community, kind of future proofing our community as well. Like, are you sure like you will be able, your community will be able to survive the future tech or the future disruptions? Have you really planned for it? And if not, then why not? Like, what is the excuse? And um, especially when we come together in these collective sense making spaces, that's when the real magic happens, because we can sit individually on it together, but then that's when the sparks fly, when people from different backgrounds come together and make sense together.
I love it. What wonderful note to end on. Deepshikha Yadav, thank you for being on the show. And for those of you that tuned in, please do, if this was interesting to you and you want to hear more topics on community building, please subscribe to the Clocktower Advisors YouTube channel, or follow Clocktower Advisors company page on LinkedIn, and you will be notified about the latest shows that come up about every 2 weeks. We usually do a live stream, but again, we do these recorded sessions as well. We are also on podcasts, so you can subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, your favorite apps. And if you just kind of want to listen to us while you're walking out in nature or at the gym, you can keep up with these wonderful, insightful conversations in that way, if you prefer. Until then, please do take care of yourself, shut off the computer, get out in nature, take a deep breath of fresh air, and we will be back again in about 2 weeks with the next episode of Talk About Your Community. Thanks again, Deepshikha.
Thank you so much, Todd.